Sarah Whitmore pressed her dead baby's blanket against her chest and stepped off the wagon into a town she had never seen before. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were dry. She had cried everything out somewhere between Missouri and Texas, somewhere along a road that had taken everything from her and left her with nothing but a folded letter and a name. Ethan Callahan. A stranger, a rancher, a man who had promised her nothing except honesty. She hadn't known that honesty could be its own kind of mercy. If this story already has your heart, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and follow Sarah's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wagon pulled away before Sarah could change her mind. She stood in the middle of Willow Ridge's main street, with a suitcase that weighed less than her grief, and dust settling around her boots like the town itself was trying to swallow her whole. The summer heat pressed down from every direction. The sky above Texas was the kind of pale, washed-out blue that didn't promise rain, only more of the same. She didn't move right away. She just stood there, reading the town the way a woman reads a room she isn't sure she's welcome in. A feed store. A sheriff's office with a cracked front window. A bank with freshly painted letters that read, Hale Financial Trust, established 1871. A general store with two women on the porch who had already stopped talking the moment they spotted her. Sarah straightened her spine and picked up her suitcase. She had not come this far to be frightened by a quiet street. The letter in her coat pocket had been read so many times the fold lines had worn thin. She knew it by memory now, every careful, deliberate sentence of it. My name is Ethan Callahan. I run the Callahan Mill and Ranch, 3 miles east of Willow Ridge, Texas. My wife passed 2 winters ago. I have a daughter, Lucy, who is 9 years old. I am not looking for romance. I am looking for someone steady and honest who can help manage a household and offer my daughter some companionship. Room and board provided, plus a small monthly wage. I cannot promise happiness, only honesty. If that is enough for you, write back. It had been enough. When you had buried your husband in April and your infant son in May, honesty started to sound like the most generous thing a person could offer. Sarah had written back the same day. She found the man she was looking for before she even reached the sheriff's office. He was hard to miss. Ethan Callahan was standing outside the building with his hat pushed back and his jaw tight, and he was holding a piece of paper the way a man holds something he doesn't want to touch but can't put down. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of lean that came from years of actual work, not youth. His hair was dark, threaded with gray at the temples. There was a scar along the left side of his jaw that had healed long ago, but never fully disappeared. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood a man in a cream-colored suit, impeccably pressed despite the heat, holding a leather document case and smiling the way some men smile when they already know how an argument is going to end. Sarah slowed her pace. She was close enough to hear them before either man noticed her. Read the numbers again, Callahan. The man in the suit, smooth voice, practiced patience, tapped the document in Ethan's hand. It's all there, in black and white. These numbers aren't right. Ethan's voice was low and controlled, the kind of control that costs something to maintain. My father paid down the primary note in '73. I've got his ledger. I've got the receipt. Receipts have a way of getting lost. The suited man, Victor Hale, Sarah would learn later, tilted his head just slightly. Droughts have a way of resetting accounts. You know how this works, Ethan. My name is Mr. Callahan to you. Victor's smile didn't shift. Of course, Mr. Callahan. I'm simply reminding you that the payment deadline is the 1st of September. 7 weeks. That's generous in my opinion. Frankly, I could push the court for an earlier hearing. You push for an earlier hearing and I'll be standing in front of the judge with every ledger my father kept for 30 years. Then I suppose we'll see each other in court. Victor closed his document case with a soft, deliberate click. Good afternoon. He turned and walked in the opposite direction, smooth, unhurried, his boots barely raising dust. And Sarah watched him go, with a cold feeling spreading across the back of her neck that had nothing to do with the heat. Then Ethan turned and saw her. He went still. She watched him take her in, the suitcase, the travel-worn dress, the way she was standing in the middle of the street with nowhere obvious to be. Something moved through his expression. Not warmth exactly, more like recognition mixed with something heavier. Miss Whitmore, he said. It wasn't a question. Mrs., she said. Old habit. But Sarah is fine. He nodded once. He didn't move toward her, and he didn't extend a hand. He just looked at her with those tired gray eyes and said, You saw that. I heard some of it. Then you already know this place isn't as quiet as I made it sound in the letter. You didn't make it sound quiet in the letter, Sarah said. You made it sound honest. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, more like the idea of one passing through. Wagon's out back, he said. Unless you want to change your mind first. I don't change my mind, Sarah said. Let's go. The ride out to the ranch was mostly silence, which suited them both. Sarah sat beside him on the wagon bench with her suitcase at her feet and the heat pressing in from all sides, watching the land flatten and stretch. The grass was the color of old straw. The sky sat on top of it like a lid. After a while, Ethan said, Victor Hale has been trying to buy out the mill property for 2 years. I gathered. He claims my father borrowed against the land during the drought years. Says the interest accumulated. He kept his eyes on the road. My father didn't borrow from Hale. He borrowed from the county credit union. Paid it back in full. And the county credit union's records? A pause. Closed down in 75. Fire. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Convenient. That's one word for it. She looked at his profile, the set of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with a kind of steadiness that didn't come from calm, but from discipline. This was a man who had learned to hold things very still on the outside because too much was moving on the inside. Do you have copies of your father's ledgers? She asked. Some. Are they at the ranch? Most of them. Then they're worth protecting. He glanced at her then, just briefly. You always talk this much? Not usually, Sarah said. But I think about numbers. My father ran a dry goods store in Ohio. I kept his books from the time I was 12. Ethan looked back at the road. I didn't advertise for an accountant. No, Sarah agreed. You advertised for someone steady and honest. She folded her hands in her lap. But I'm also good with numbers. You can decide later whether that's useful. He didn't respond to that, but he didn't shut it down either. The ranch announced itself slowly. First the windmill, turning lazily in the dead heat. Then the outline of a barn. Then the main house, low and long, built from Texas limestone that had gone gold in the afternoon light. A girl was sitting on the porch steps. She was small for 9, dark-haired like her father, with her knees pulled up and her chin resting on them. She was watching the wagon come in with the particular stillness of a child who had learned early that surprises were rarely good ones. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop. The girl didn't stand up. Ethan said, Lucy, come say hello. Lucy looked at Sarah with eyes that were careful and assessing in a way that no 9-year-old's eyes should be. Then she looked at her father. Is she staying? Lucy asked. For now, Ethan said. Come say hello. Lucy unfolded herself from the steps and walked over. She stopped about 3 feet away from Sarah and looked up at her. My mother died, Lucy said. Not angrily, not sadly, just as a plain statement of fact, the way you might announce that it hadn't rained in a month. In case you were wondering why Papa needed someone, Sarah crouched down until she was at the girl's eye level. I know, she said. I'm sorry. Losing your mother is one of the hardest things there is. Did you lose yours? When I was 14. Lucy studied her. Did it get better? Sarah didn't lie to her. It got different, and different started to feel better eventually. But it took a while. Lucy considered this with the gravity of a small judge weighing evidence. Then she said, Papa doesn't make biscuits right. They come out like rocks. I make very good biscuits, Sarah said. Do you make them with honey? I do. Lucy looked at her father. She can stay, she announced, as though this were entirely her decision, and walked back to the porch. Ethan watched her go. When he looked back at Sarah, there was something in his expression that was quieter than anything that had been there before. Not quite gratitude, more like relief, which in some people runs deeper. She hasn't said that much to a stranger in 8 months, he said. Sarah stood back up. She's a good judge of character. She's a complicated judge of character, he said, and something close to dry humor passed through his voice. It surprised her. She picked up her suitcase. Show me where I'll be staying. Her room was small and clean. A single bed, a washstand, a window that looked out toward the windmill. Someone had put a small blue pitcher on the sill. It had a crack in it, repaired with what looked like dried clay, and it was empty. But someone had put it there for color. Sarah stood looking at it for a long moment before she set down her suitcase. She pressed her hand flat against the quilt on the bed. She thought about the room she had shared with her husband in Ohio. The way Thomas had snored softly and she had complained about it, and how the memory of that snoring now felt like something she would give years of her life to hear again. She thought about the cradle Thomas had built, the one she had left behind because she couldn't look at it anymore. She thought about the weight of her baby, 7 pounds even, the midwife had said, and how something that small could leave a space so much larger than itself. She breathed in, breathed out. You're here, she told herself. This is here. Stay here. She unpacked her suitcase. Supper that first night was quiet. Lucy ate with the focused efficiency of a child who had been eating alone or near silence for long enough that conversation at the table felt like something that required permission. Ethan ate the way working men eat, purposefully, without ceremony. Sarah had cooked, which had required a brief but pointed conversation about where things were kept, conducted with Ethan leaning against the kitchen door frame, offering minimal information, until Sarah simply started opening cupboards herself. Flour's low, she said. I know. Coffee's almost gone. I know. Is there a list somewhere, or have you been keeping track in your head? He looked at her with the expression of a man who had been doing something a specific way for long enough that the idea of doing it differently required more thought than he'd budgeted for. In my head, he said. I'll start a list tomorrow, Sarah said. He didn't argue. At the table, after a while, Lucy said, The Dobbins boy said Papa's going to lose the ranch. Silence. Ethan set down his fork. James Dobbins is 11 years old, he said. He repeats things he overhears and doesn't understand. He said Mr. Hale is going to take everything and turn the mill into a warehouse. Lucy, is it true? Ethan was quiet for a moment. He picked his fork back up. No, he said. It's not going to happen. Lucy looked at Sarah. Sarah looked back at her steadily. "I believe your father," Sarah said. Lucy chewed thoughtfully. "James also said Mr. Hale bought the Prescott farm last spring, and the Prescotts left overnight. He said Mrs. Prescott was crying when they loaded the wagon." "That's enough," Ethan said, not unkindly, but firmly. Lucy went back to her supper, but Sarah filed away what she had heard and kept it carefully in the back of her mind, where she stored things that didn't add up yet. After Lucy was in bed and the dishes were done, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his ledger book spread out in front of him. Sarah had not been invited to stay. She had simply refilled her coffee cup and sat down across from him, and he had looked at her for a moment and then looked back at his papers. She let the silence run for a few minutes. Then she said, "May I look?" He pushed one of the ledgers across the table without looking up. She opened it. The handwriting inside was careful and methodical, not Ethan's hand, she could tell, because the entries from the last 2 years were in a different script, more angular, more impatient. This was his father's work. She turned pages slowly, reading not just the numbers, but the story they told. Drought years, lean years, a series of careful repayments that tracked against a loan schedule with the diligence of a man who understood exactly what he owed and to whom. "The last repayment entry," she said, "is dated March 1873 to the Willow County Credit Union." "Yes." "And Hale is claiming you owe against a note from 1871. He finally looked up. "Before the credit union closed." "He's claiming the 1871 note was never fully satisfied." "He's lying." "I believe you," Sarah said, "but belief isn't evidence." She turned another page. "Do you have any correspondence? Letters from the credit union? Any external confirmation of the repayment?" "Some, not all." He rubbed the back of his neck. "What I have might not be enough for a judge who already does business with Hale." Sarah looked down at the ledger again. "What about your neighbors? The families Hale has already moved against? The Prescotts, anyone else? Did they have similar situations? Loans from the same period?" He was quiet. "Ethan." He looked up when she used his name. She hadn't used it before. Neither of them commented on it. "3 families," he said, "that I know of, all of them with land adjacent to the mill property or the water rights corridor." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking at the numbers on the page in front of her. "He's not collecting debts," she said. "No." "He's building a case, property by property, working towards something specific." "The water rights," Ethan said. "Whoever controls the mill property controls the water access for the Eastern Valley. That's worth more than the land itself." Sarah closed the ledger. She folded her hands on top of it. "Then we need to find proof he forged the notes," she said. "Or proof the credit union's records still exist somewhere. Copies, correspondence, anything external to your ledgers." Ethan looked at her across the table. The lamp between them was burning low. His face in that light was very tired, and something else, something that looked a little like being seen. "You came here to manage a household," he said. "I came here to be useful," Sarah said. "If this is where the usefulness is needed, then this is where I'll be." A long pause. "I'll pull everything I have tomorrow morning," he said, "before I ride out to the east pasture." "I'll look at it while you're gone," Sarah said, "and I'll start the supply list." He almost smiled. "Right, the supply list." "And the biscuits," she said. "I promised Lucy." This time, it was close enough to a real smile that she counted it. She took her coffee to her room. She lay on the narrow bed in the dark and listened to the wind move through the dry grass outside the window, and felt, for the first time in months, like there was something in front of her besides grief. It wasn't hope exactly. but it was the shape of something that could become it. She pressed her hand flat against the quilt, the same way she had earlier, grounding herself in the texture of it, in the plain fact of here and now and this. Somewhere in the house, the clock on the mantel ticked. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called out once and was answered by silence. Sarah closed her eyes. She did not sleep easily, but she slept. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, lying in that small room with the cracked blue pitcher on the sill, was that someone had already told Victor Hale that Ethan Callahan had a new woman at the ranch, and that Victor Hale had smiled his careful, practiced smile and made a note in his own private ledger. New variable. Monitor. He had not yet decided whether Sarah Whitmore was a complication or an opportunity. By the end of the week, he would decide she was neither. She was a threat. And Victor Hale did not tolerate threats. The ledgers were worse than Ethan had let on. Sarah found that out on her second morning at the ranch, sitting alone at the kitchen table with the full stack of his father's record books spread out in front of her, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago because she kept forgetting to drink it. Ethan had ridden out before sunrise. Lucy was still asleep. The house was quiet enough that Sarah could hear the windmill turning outside and the faint creak of the barn settling in the heat. She worked through the numbers the way her father had taught her. Start at the beginning, follow every dollar, trust nothing until it connects to something else. The elder Callahan had been meticulous. Every purchase recorded, every debt logged, every repayment noted with the date and the name of the creditor. The 1871 loan from Willow County Credit Union was there, clear as anything. $2,040 borrowed against the mill property during the worst year of the drought. The repayment schedule ran across 3 years, every installment recorded in the same steady hand. And then, in March of 1873, a final entry. Paid in full. Receipt number 114, Willow County Credit Union. Balance owed, 0. Sarah set down her pencil. She turned to the back of the ledger, where miscellaneous documents had been folded and tucked. Receipts, tax notices, a water rights agreement from 1868. She went through each one carefully, unfolding them, smoothing them flat, reading every line. Receipt number 114 was not there. She went through the stack twice, then the third time. It was gone. She sat back in her chair and pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the ceiling. Someone had removed it. Not recently. The edges of the papers that remained had yellowed evenly, which meant the receipt had been absent long enough that the discoloration gap wasn't new. Years, maybe. Which meant whoever had taken it had either had access to the ranch house or had taken it from the credit union itself before the fire. "You found something?" Sarah startled. Lucy was standing in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, hair tangled from sleep, watching her with those careful, measuring eyes. "Good morning," Sarah said. "Did I wake you?" "No." Lucy came to the table and looked at the ledgers without touching them. "You have the same face Papa gets when he's found something he doesn't want to have found. It's nothing for you to worry about." "People always say that," Lucy said, "and then it turns out to be the thing worth worrying about most." She sat down across from Sarah with the gravity of someone twice her age. "Papa didn't sleep last night either. I heard him walking." Sarah looked at her. "How long has he been having trouble sleeping?" "Since Mr. Hale sent the first letter." Lucy folded her hands on the table, a gesture so similar to her father's that it made something ache in Sarah's chest. "That was in February. Before that, since Mama died. Before that," she paused, "I don't know. I was little." "Lucy," Sarah said carefully, "does your father keep any papers anywhere besides these ledgers?" A strong box, maybe, or somewhere in the mill office. Lucy thought about it. There's a tin box in the mill office. He keeps it under the floorboards. He thinks I don't know about it. A small pause. I know about most things. Sarah believed her entirely. She started the biscuits. Ethan came back from the east pasture at mid-morning with mud on his boots and a new tension around his eyes that hadn't been there when he left. He came through the back door and stopped when he saw Sarah at the kitchen table, with the ledgers still open and a page of her own notes beside them. "The receipt is missing," she said before he could speak. "Receipt 114 from the credit union. It was in this ledger. I can see from the edge markings where it was stored. It's been removed." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had just had a fear confirmed that he'd been carrying quietly for months. "I noticed it was gone last winter," he said, when Hale sent the first letter. "You didn't report it to the sheriff?" "Sheriff Briggs does his banking with Hale Financial." His voice was flat. "Has for 12 years. Sarah set down her pencil. "Is there anyone in this county who doesn't owe Hale something?" "Fewer every year." "What about the pastor, the school teacher?" "Pastor Morrow has a mortgage through Hale on the church building. Miss Ellis—" He stopped. Miss Ellis might be the one person. The school teacher. She owns her property outright, inherited it. Hale's tried twice to buy her out. A pause. She told him no both times, which in this town qualifies her as something close to a war hero. Despite everything, Sarah almost smiled. "Is she someone you trust?" "As much as I trust anyone here." "Then I'd like to speak to her." Sarah tapped her notes. But first, Lucy mentioned a tin box in the mill office, under the floorboards. Ethan went still. Then he looked toward the hallway as though confirming Lucy wasn't nearby. "She told you about that?" "She tells me things," Sarah said. "She's been watching this situation longer than either of us has been giving her credit for." Something moved through his face. Guilt, she thought. The particular guilt of a parent who realizes they've been protecting a child from a truth the child has already worked out on their own. He stood up. "Come with me." The tin box held 4 documents. The first was a letter from the Willow County Credit Union, dated April 1873, referencing the closure of the account and the zero balance. It wasn't a formal receipt, but it referenced the account number and the final payment. The second was a handwritten note from the credit union manager, a man named Gerald Forsyth, confirming, in plain language, that the Callahan Mill property note had been paid in full. The third was a copy of the original loan agreement, with the interest schedule printed clearly along the right margin. And the fourth was a deed, not for the mill property, for the water rights corridor that ran along the eastern boundary of the ranch. A narrow strip of land that, on its own, looked almost worthless. Except that it wasn't. Sarah stared at it. "This is the key," she said. "The deed? Whoever owns this corridor controls access to the tributary. Without it, the Eastern Valley ranches have no reliable water source." She looked up at him. "Does Hale know this exists?" "He's never asked about it directly." Ethan's voice had gone very quiet. "My father never talked about it openly. Said some things were worth more, kept private." "Your father was a smart man." Sarah refolded the deed carefully. "This stays hidden. Everything in this box stays where it is until we know exactly what we're dealing with." She looked at him. "But we need to move the ledgers. If Hale has already been inside this property once—" "He hasn't been inside." "Someone has. The receipt didn't remove itself." Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at the floorboard she'd replaced over the tin box, then at the mill office door. "There's a ranch hand," he said slowly. "Tom Garrett. Been with me 3 years. He left in March, 2 weeks after Hale sent the first letter. Said he had family business. Did he? A long silence. I don't know. Sarah said nothing. She let him sit with it. After a moment, Ethan exhaled through his nose. I hired a good worker, and I didn't ask enough questions. You trusted someone, Sarah said. That's not a character flaw. It's what decent people do. She stood up. Now we know. So now we're careful. He looked at her across the small space of the mill office. The morning light was coming through the single window, and he was looking at her the way people look at someone who has just said the thing they needed to hear, said plainly and without decoration. Why are you doing this? He asked. You came here for a household job and a wage. I came here because I had nowhere else useful to be, Sarah said. And this is useful. She picked up the document stack. I'm going to copy everything important today. 2 sets. We keep one here and we hide the other somewhere Hale would never think to look. Where? She thought about it. Lucy's room. He stared at her. No one searches a child's room for financial documents, she said. Think about it. He thought about it. That is either very clever or completely insane. Those 2 things aren't always different, Sarah said, and walked back toward the house. She met Victor Hale for the first time that same afternoon. She hadn't planned on it. She had driven the supply wagon into Willow Ridge alone. Ethan had stayed at the ranch to repair the east fence. With her list in her pocket and a clear intention to get what she needed and come back without incident. She was loading flour sacks into the wagon bed when she heard the footsteps on the boardwalk stop behind her. You must be the new woman out at the Callahan place. She turned around. Victor Hale in person was more polished than she had expected, and more dangerous feeling than his appearance warranted. He was perhaps 50, well-fed, with pale eyes that moved over her the way a man prices livestock. Quickly, completely, without emotion. Sarah Whitmore, she said. She didn't extend her hand. He didn't seem to notice the omission. Victor Hale. I run the bank here. I expect Ethan's mentioned me. He has. I hope kindly. He mentioned you professionally, Sarah said. Victor smiled. I understand you've been with the family less than a week. Settling in all right? Fine, thank you. Good, good. He rocked back on his heels slightly. Casual, friendly. The performance of a man who had long ago learned that a certain type of person is less guarded around someone who seems harmless. I'll be direct with you, Mrs. Whitmore, because I think you're an intelligent woman. Ethan Callahan is in a very difficult financial position. The situation with the ranch is more serious than he may have let on. He's been straightforward with me. Has he? Not a question. Then you know the payment deadline is September 1st, and you know what happens if he misses it. He paused, letting that sit. I have a great deal of respect for Ethan. This is business, nothing personal. But I would hate to see a woman in your position, newly arrived, dependent on the stability of that household, caught up in something that goes badly. Sarah looked at him steadily. That's very considerate of you. I try to be. Another smile, warmer this time, which made it worse. If you ever find yourself uncertain about the situation out there, my door is always open. I'm a reasonable man. I'll keep that in mind, Sarah said. She turned back to the wagon and finished loading her flour. She heard him walk away. Her hands were completely steady. Her pulse was not. Miss Clara Ellis lived a quarter-mile from the schoolhouse, in a small house that was immaculately kept and planted with more variety of flowering things than seemed possible in a Texas summer. She was perhaps 45, spare and sharp-eyed, with ink-stained fingers and the no-nonsense posture of a woman who had long ago decided she had no time for pretense. She opened the door before Sarah finished knocking. "You're the Callahan woman," she said. "I heard you came into town today. Come in." Her house smelled like books and coffee. Sarah sat at her kitchen table and told her, carefully, with details selected rather than withheld, about the ledgers, the missing receipt, the forged note structure she suspected, and the water rights deed Ethan's father had hidden and never spoken of publicly. Clara Ellis listened without interrupting, which was the mark of either a very disciplined or a very intelligent person. Probably both. When Sarah finished, Clara set down her coffee cup. "The Prescotts," she said, "and the Mooney family, and the Garcias before them." She looked at Sarah directly. "I've been watching this for 2 years. I have every public land filing Victor Hale has made since 1871. I've kept copies. I wasn't sure what they meant until just now." Sarah's heart rate shifted. "Do you have filing records for the credit union accounts? Any public disclosures?" "Annual summaries, filed with the county before the union closed." Clara stood and went to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. "I kept them because I keep everything. My father said you never know what piece of paper becomes important." She pulled out a folder and brought it back to the table. "I think we may be looking at a pattern that goes back further than Ethan realizes." She opened the folder, and there, in the county's own public record, filed innocuously in an annual summary that no one had thought to re-examine, was account number 1871-114, Willow County Credit Union. Callahan Mill Property. Balance at close of institution, 0. Sarah pressed her finger to the number on the page. She could hear her own heartbeat. "This is it," she said. "This is the external confirmation." "It won't hold up alone," Clara said. "But combined with his father's ledger entries and the letter from Forsyth, it establishes the pattern." Sarah looked up. "Victor Hale isn't presenting a legitimate debt. He's constructing one from the absence of records he either took or destroyed. And if we can show this document alongside what we have at the ranch—" "You'd need someone to stand up in front of a judge and say so," Clara said. "And in this town, that is not a small thing to ask." "I know." "Hale owns the bank. He holds the notes on half the properties in this county. People don't cross him because they can't afford to." "I know that too," Sarah said. She looked back at the account summary. "But he doesn't hold a note on your property." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "No, he does not. And you've been keeping these records for 2 years." "I have." Sarah looked at her. "Then you've already decided something. You just needed to know it wasn't only you." The school teacher was quiet for a long time. The clock on her mantel ticked through the silence. "Take a copy of that page," Clara said finally. "I'll make one for myself. And Mrs. Whitmore," she paused, "tell Ethan to be careful between now and September. Victor Hale doesn't only work through lawyers." The way she said it made the hair on Sarah's arm stand up. "What do you mean?" Clara looked at her directly. "The Mooney barn burned down the night before Robert Mooney was scheduled to testify about his loan terms. They called it an accident." A beat. "It wasn't an accident." Sarah drove back to the ranch with the copied document folded inside her dress, tucked flat against her ribs. The sun was going down behind her, and the road was empty, and the fear in her chest had settled into something colder and more useful than fear. She was already thinking about what needed to happen next. What she was not thinking about, what she had no way of knowing, was that a rider had left Willow Ridge 20 minutes ahead of her, headed east, toward the Callahan Ranch, and he wasn't carrying a message. Sarah heard the horse before she saw the smoke. She was still half a mile from the ranch when the animal came at her at full gallop, riderless, reins trailing, eyes wide with a particular terror of a creature that has been near fire. She pulled her wagon hard to the right, and the horse thundered past her and kept going. And before she could fully process what that meant, she looked up and saw the orange glow against the darkening sky. The mill was burning. She snapped the reins so hard her palms stung. The wagon rattled and jolted down the road, and she was already calling out before she reached the gate. "Ethan! Lucy!" Her voice swallowed by the heat and the roar of the fire that had taken the mill's upper floor completely and was working its way down with the methodical patience of a thing that does not hurry because it does not have to. Ethan was outside. He was fighting it with a water bucket and losing, the way every man who has ever stood in front of a burning building with a single bucket has lost. And when he heard her, he turned, and the look on his face stopped her cold for one single second. Not fear, not grief, but a specific fury that comes from a man who has just watched something irreplaceable be deliberately destroyed. "Where's Lucy?" Sarah was off the wagon before it fully stopped. "House." His voice was rough from smoke. "She's in the house. I got her out before." He turned back to the fire. "The water line from the mill pump is cut. Someone cut it." Sarah grabbed his arm. "Stop, stop, Ethan, look at me." She waited until he did. "The building is gone. You cannot save it. Are you hurt?" He shook his head. "Then come away from it, right now. Come away." He let her pull him back, but he kept his eyes on the fire the whole time, and she could feel the tension in his arm like a wire pulled past its limit. From the house, the front door opened, and Lucy came running across the yard in her bare feet. She threw herself against her father's side, and he grabbed her with one arm and held her against him without looking down, his jaw tight, his eyes still fixed on the burning mill. "I saw them," Lucy said. Her voice was shaking, but her chin was up. "I saw them from my window. Papa, I saw them." Ethan looked down at her then. "Who?" "3 men. One of them was Mr. Hale's man, the tall one with the brown coat, who came to the house in June. I recognized him." She was gripping her father's shirt with both fists. "They had torches. They didn't even try to hide." Because they didn't need to, Sarah thought. Because they own the sheriff. Because there is no one in this county to report them to who isn't already in Hale's pocket. She said none of this out loud. "Go back inside," Ethan told Lucy. "Put shoes on. Pack a bag. The small one. Just what matters." Lucy looked up at him with those careful eyes. "Are we leaving?" "No." His voice was flat and absolute. "We are not leaving. But I want you ready, just in case. Go on." Lucy went. She didn't argue, which told Sarah more about how frightened the girl was than any amount of crying would have. Ethan stood watching the mill burn down to its frame, and Sarah stood beside him, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. The heat was immense. The smell of it, wood and oil, and something chemical she didn't want to identify, pressed in from all sides. "The documents," Ethan said. "I have the copies I made," Sarah said. "They're with me. And the originals are still under the floorboard in the office." A pause. "If the office floor holds." "It's stone foundation. It'll hold." He exhaled. "But if they come back, they won't come back tonight," Sarah said. "They did what they came to do. Tonight, this is a message." "I received it." "Good." She turned to face him fully. "Then let's decide what to send back." He looked at her. The fire reflected in his eyes, and she held his gaze and didn't look away. "I went to see Clara Ellis today," she said. He went still. "You didn't tell me that was your plan." "I didn't know it was my plan until I was doing it." She reached inside her dress and pulled out the folded document. She had county records, annual summaries from before the credit union closed. Ethan, account 1871-114, is listed in the public record with a zero balance. It exists outside your father's ledger. It is independently verifiable. He took the paper from her hand and read it in the firelight. She watched his face go through several things in rapid succession. Disbelief, then calculation, then something that looked almost like the first breath a drowning man takes when someone finally pulls him to the surface. "This is real," he said. "It is. Clara Ellis had this for 2 years, and she didn't know what she was looking at until I told her what to look for." Sarah folded her hands. "She's willing to stand up. She's not the only one, I think. If we can give the other families the same thing we're giving you right now, proof that they're not alone, and proof that the lies are documentable." She paused. "But we have to move fast. Hale just escalated. He burned your mill. Next time, it won't be the mill." Ethan refolded the document and held it in his fist. "The Mooney family," he said. "Yes. And the Garcias. And the Prescotts, though the Prescotts left." "Do you know where they went?" "Abilene. Robert Prescott has a brother there." "Can you reach him?" "I can send a letter." "Send it tomorrow, first thing." Sarah looked back at the burning mill. "We have 2 things they don't know we have: the county record and the water rights deed. Those 2 things together tell a story that no forged document can undo. But we need to get them in front of a judge, and we need to do it before September 1st. "The circuit judge comes through in late August," Ethan said. "Judge Harlan. He's out of Fort Worth. No connection to Hale that I know of." "When exactly?" "3rd week of August, usually. 2 weeks from now, give or take." 2 weeks. Sarah turned it over in her mind, calculating the way her father had taught her. Every variable, every possible point of failure, every place where something could go wrong, and what to do when it did. "We need to file a counterpetition before he arrives," she said. "Fraud and forgery. It needs to be on record before Hale can file anything else." "I don't have a lawyer." "Clara Ellis knows one in Waco. She mentioned him. A man named Aldridge, who doesn't do business with Hale." She looked at Ethan. "She said she'd write to him." Ethan was quiet. The fire had dropped to a lower burn now, the frame of the mill standing in it like bones. He was staring at it, and she let him stare for a moment, because some losses need to be looked at before you can move past them. Then he said, "My father built that mill." "I know. He built it with 4 other men, took them most of a summer." A pause. "He said it was the thing he was proudest of." Sarah said nothing. She stood beside him and let the grief have its moment. After a while, he said quietly, "I'm not going to let them have the land." "No," Sarah agreed. "You're not." He looked at her then, really looked at her, the way he hadn't let himself fully do before. "You have that document folded inside your dress because you expected something like this to happen." "I expected something," she said. "I didn't know what." "You were ready." "I try to be useful." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not softer exactly, but less guarded, which in some men is the same thing. "Thomas Whitmore was your husband?" "Yes." "How long were you married?" 4 years. "And the baby?" 6 weeks, Sarah said. "He lived 6 weeks." Ethan said nothing, but he didn't look away from her face. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," she said. "I'm telling you because you look like you were about to apologize for asking, and you don't need to." She looked back at the dying fire. I came here because I needed somewhere to put my hands to work, while the rest of me figured out how to keep moving. That's the truth of it. And now? She thought about the document against her ribs. She thought about Clara Ellis's ink-stained fingers and the filing cabinet full of careful records. She thought about Lucy saying, "I know about most things," with the gravity of a child who had decided the only protection available to her was information. "Now I'm angry," Sarah said, "which is more useful than grieving in a situation like this." Something moved through his expression. Recognition, she thought. The particular recognition of someone who has used anger the same way, for the same reasons, and knows exactly what it costs and what it's worth. He almost said something. Then the barn door banged. They both turned. A figure was moving fast across the yard from the direction of the road. Not running, but walking with the deliberate speed of someone carrying urgent news. It was a boy, maybe 14, and Sarah recognized him vaguely from town. One of the boys who hung around the general store. He stopped in front of Ethan, breathing hard. "Mr. Callahan, my pa sent me. He said to tell you Victor Hale went to Sheriff Briggs tonight. He filed a complaint." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What kind of complaint?" The boy swallowed. "He's saying you set the fire yourself. For the insurance." The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah could hear the last of the mill timbers settling. Then Ethan said, very carefully, "My father built that mill." "Yes, sir, I know it." The boy looked genuinely distressed. "My pa said to warn you. Briggs is talking about coming out here tomorrow morning." "Tell your father I'm grateful," Ethan said. "And tell him to keep his head down. He doesn't need to be involved in this." The boy nodded and ran back the way he had come. Sarah and Ethan stood in the yard, and the night pressed in around them, and the mill frame glowed at the edges, like something still trying to hold its shape. "He moved faster than I expected," Sarah said. "He panicked," Ethan said. "We rattled him somehow, and he panicked." Sarah thought about her conversation with Victor Hale on the boardwalk. His careful eyes, the way they had moved over her and priced her. "He saw me in town today," she said. "He spoke to me." "What did he say?" "He warned me, politely. Told me to be cautious about my position, that your situation was serious." She paused. "He was taking my measure." "And what did he decide?" "I think he decided I knew more than I should." She looked at the dying mill. "I think he already had this planned, and my presence moved up his timeline." Ethan exhaled slowly. "If Briggs comes tomorrow with a warrant—" "He won't have grounds for a warrant," Sarah said. "An accusation of arson requires evidence. Hale has none, because you didn't do it." She turned to face him fully. "But we need those documents out of the mill office floor before morning. Tonight." "The office floor is still hot." "I know." She didn't look away. "I'm not asking you to do it alone." He looked at her for a long moment in the way that he had looked at her over the ledgers in the lamplight. That same quality of being unexpectedly seen by someone he hadn't expected to see him. Then he said, "Get the water pail." They worked for the better part of 2 hours, dousing the office foundation with well water until the stone was cool enough to approach. And then Ethan went in alone, while Sarah stood outside with a second bucket and her heart in her throat, listening to him move inside the partially collapsed structure, with a lantern in one hand and a pry bar in the other. He came out with a tin box pressed under his arm, soot on his face, and a burn on the back of his right hand that he hadn't mentioned, and she noticed anyway. "Let me see that," she said. "It's nothing." "Let me see it." He held out his hand with the resignation of a man who has learned that some arguments are a waste of good energy. She examined the burn, real but not serious, and wrapped it in the clean cloth she had had the foresight to bring from the kitchen. He watched her wrap it without speaking. When she finished, she didn't let go of his hand right away. She didn't mean to hold it. It was purely the momentum of the task. But she did, for one moment longer than strictly necessary. And he let her. And then she released it and stepped back. "The documents are intact?" she asked. "Intact." He tucked the tin box under his good arm. "All of it." "Good." She picked up the water bucket. "We'll hide everything in Lucy's room tonight. In the morning, I want to ride to Miss Ellis." "I'll come with you." "You should stay here," Sarah said. "If Briggs comes and there's no one home." "I'll send word to my neighbor, Jack Tanner. He'll keep watch." Ethan looked at her directly. "I'm not letting you ride into town alone after what happened tonight. That's not a negotiation, Mrs. Whitmore." She held his gaze. "Sarah," she said. "What?" "You called me Mrs. Whitmore. It's Sarah." A beat of silence. "Sarah," he said, and the way he said it, careful, like something he intended to be accurate, made it sound different than it had when she'd first told him in the street. She picked up the water bucket. "Let's go check on Lucy." Lucy was sitting in her room with her packed bag beside her and a book open on her lap, reading by lamplight with the studied composure of a child pretending very hard to be calm. When they appeared in the doorway, she looked up, and her eyes went immediately to her father's wrapped hand, and her face did several things in quick succession that she didn't quite manage to control. "It's a minor burn," Ethan said. "I'm fine." "You always say that," Lucy said. "It's always true." "It wasn't true when you fell off the barn roof in the spring and said your ribs were fine, and then couldn't lift anything for 3 weeks. Sarah pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. Ethan cleared his throat. "We're going to put some things in your room tonight for safekeeping. Papers. They need to stay hidden." "Under the floorboard?" Lucy asked immediately. "You knew about—" He stopped. "Of course you did." "The one by the left bedpost," Lucy said helpfully. "It's looser than the others. I've been keeping my diary under there for a year, and you never noticed." "I try to respect your privacy," Ethan said, with the tone of a man recalibrating. Lucy closed her book. "I'll move my diary," she said pragmatically. "There's enough room for both." She got down from the bed and lifted the board with the practiced ease of long habit, and she looked up at her father, and he looked down at her. And something passed between them that Sarah had no name for but recognized anyway. The look between two people who have been each other's whole world for a long time and are only now beginning to remember that worlds can be larger than two people. Ethan crouched down and placed the tin box in the space beneath the floorboard. Sarah folded the county document and placed it alongside. Lucy replaced the board and sat back on her bed and picked up her book again, as though this were perfectly routine. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Lucy," Sarah said. She followed Ethan back into the hallway, and they stood for a moment in the near dark of it, close enough that she could still smell smoke on his clothes, and the house was quiet around them in a way that was different from the quiet of the first night. Less empty, somehow, though nothing had been added to it, and several things had been taken away. "Try to sleep," she said. "You first," he said. She almost argued. Instead, she said, "Wake me if Briggs comes before morning." "I will." She went to her room. She lay on the bed without taking off her boots. She did not sleep. And 2 miles down the road, in a freshly lit lamp in the back office of Hale Financial Trust, Victor Hale sat with a glass of whiskey and a piece of paper he had not yet signed, and he turned it in his hands and looked at it with the patience of a man who has never once lost anything he decided to keep. The paper was an order for the constable in the neighboring county. It wasn't about the debt. It wasn't about the mill. It was about Sarah Whitmore. and what Victor Hale had paid a man in Ohio to find out about her. Sheriff Briggs arrived at 7 in the morning. Sarah heard the horses from her room and was on her feet before she'd fully decided to stand, boots already on from the night before, hair pulled back in the time it took to cross the hallway. Ethan was already at the front door when she reached it. He had not slept either, she could see that plainly. And Lucy was a silent shadow at the top of the stairs, watching. 2 horses, Briggs and a deputy Sarah hadn't seen before. Big man, young, with the careful blankness of someone paid not to think. Briggs himself was in his 50s, thick through the middle, with a mustache that had gone gray, and eyes that had gone careful in the particular way of a man who had spent too many years deciding how much to see and how much to look past. He took off his hat when Sarah appeared behind Ethan. It was a small gesture. She filed it away. "Ethan," Briggs said. "Sheriff." Ethan's voice was even. "Early for a social call. Received a complaint last night. Victor Hale is making a claim your mill fire was deliberate, for insurance purposes." "My mill fire was deliberate," Ethan said. 3 men with torches. My daughter saw them from her window." Briggs's expression didn't shift, which told Sarah he had already heard this version and had decided in advance how to handle it. 9-year-old girl, dark night. She recognized one of Hale's men, Ethan said. Described him specifically. Brown coat, tall. He came to this property in June. "Ethan, do you want her description in writing, Sheriff? Because I will have her write it out this morning, and I will bring it to your office, and you can file it alongside whatever Victor Hale said to you last night." Briggs turned his hat in his hands. He looked briefly, very briefly, at Sarah, and then back at Ethan. "Nobody's making any arrests. I'm here to inform you of the complaint, that's all." "Then consider me informed." A silence stretched between the 2 men with the weight of a long history in it. Then Briggs said, quietly enough that his deputy couldn't quite hear, "Be careful, Ethan. I mean that." And then he put his hat back on and rode away. Ethan closed the door. He stood with his hand flat against it for a moment, his back to the room. "He warned you," Sarah said. "Briggs isn't a bad man." Ethan turned around. "He's a weak one, which in some situations is worse. But that, right there," he tilted his head toward the door, "that was him telling me what he can't say out loud. That Hale is moving. That Hale is moving fast." He looked at her. "We need to get to Clara Ellis." "I know. I need to tell you something first." Sarah kept her voice steady. "Last night, before I fell asleep, I was thinking about what Hale said to me on the boardwalk. He said he was a reasonable man, and his door was always open." She paused. "Men like Hale don't say things like that to people they consider irrelevant." He was already building something when he said it. Building what? I don't know yet, but he looked at me like a man who already has information and is deciding how to use it. She met his eyes. "Is there anything about my history here? Anything I should have told you before, that he could have already found out?" Ethan's expression was straightforward. "I don't know anything about your history that you haven't told me yourself." "I know. I'm asking whether you told anyone that you'd written to a widow in Ohio. Anyone in town." He thought about it. "I filed a post office notice of address change for the ranch. Standard procedure for receiving correspondence." He paused. "The postmaster is Ed Carver. And Ed Carver banks with Hale." The silence said everything. "He could have seen the Ohio return address," Ethan said slowly. "Could have mentioned it." "Hale has had 10 days, Sarah said. "A man with his resources and his contacts, 10 days is enough time to send a telegram and receive an answer." She kept her voice level. "My husband died of fever. My son died of fever 6 weeks later. There is nothing in my history that is shameful or criminal, but there may be something that Hale thinks he can use as a distraction. He'd try to discredit you, Ethan said, not a question. If I'm the one presenting documents in a courtroom, yes. He would try to make me small before I can make him accountable. She straightened. It won't work if we move first, but I needed you to know he might try. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Is there anything you want to tell me before we walk into a courthouse and I stand beside you? She looked back at him with the same directness. My husband borrowed money against our store in the last year of his life, when he was too sick to work. I paid it back after he died. Everything except a small remainder I couldn't cover before I left Ohio. $47. I left a letter with the creditor explaining I would send payment when I was settled. She did not look away. That is the whole of it. $47, Ethan said. That's all. He nodded once. Then we go to Clara Ellis. Clara Ellis opened the door before they knocked, as though she had been watching for them, which she probably had. She took one look at Ethan's wrapped hand and the smoke still faintly present in his clothes and said, Sit down, both of you. I'll get coffee, and then you'll tell me everything. She already knew about the mill. Word traveled faster than horses in a town this small. And she had spent the morning, she told them, composing a letter to the lawyer Aldridge in Waco. I sent it at 6 this morning with the mail rider, she said, setting cups in front of them. I told him we needed a response within 4 days. 4 days might not be enough, Ethan said. It will have to be. Clara sat down and folded her hands. Hale filed an arson complaint this morning, which you already know. What you may not know is that he filed something else simultaneously. She looked at both of them. A petition to accelerate the debt hearing. He's asking the county clerk to move the date up from September 1st to August 15th. Sarah set down her coffee cup. He can do that? He's claiming exigent circumstances, that the property is at risk of devaluation due to the fire. Clara's voice was dry. Which he caused. That is breathtaking, Sarah said. That's Victor Hale. Clara pulled a paper from the folder in front of her. August 15th is 9 days from now. The number sat in the room like a stone dropped in still water. 9 days. Ethan's jaw tightened visibly, but he said nothing. Sarah watched him and thought about what it cost a man to receive blow after blow without breaking, and about how the ones who managed it were often the ones closest to the edge. We file the counter-petition today, Sarah said. Right now, before we do anything else. I have the framework drafted, Clara said, sliding a page across the table. Fraud, forgery, pattern of predatory acquisition affecting multiple properties. I've listed the Callahan case as primary and the Mooney and Garcia cases as supporting instances. She paused. I need you to sign it, Ethan. Ethan read it. He read it slowly, his burned hand flat on the table beside the page. And when he finished, he looked up at Clara. This is good. It's as good as I can make it without Aldrich, Clara said. But it establishes the record. It puts our version in front of the clerk before Hale can close the door. Ethan picked up the pen. He signed it. Clara took it back, added her own signature as co-petitioner, which made Ethan look up sharply. And she said, simply, I told you, I've been waiting for someone else to be ready. You understand what this means, Ethan said. If Hale comes after your property. He's been trying to come after my property for 2 years, Clara said. The difference is that now I'm not sitting quietly while he does it. She stood. I'll file this personally, this morning, and I'll bring copies to 3 different people for safekeeping before noon. She was putting on her hat when she paused. "There's one more thing," she said. "Robert Prescott wrote to me last month from Abilene. I didn't know why he'd written at the time. Just keeping in touch, I thought." She opened the folder again and extracted a letter. "He mentioned something in passing that I didn't think important until this morning. He said that when Hale presented the debt papers to him, the signature at the bottom wasn't the credit union manager's signature. He'd met Forsyth 3 times, and the signature didn't match." The room went very still. "He noticed, but he didn't know what to do with it," Clara continued. "He was scared. He left." She held the letter out. "He put it in writing, which means if he's willing to testify—" "Can you reach him?" Sarah asked. "I have his address in Abilene." "Telegraph him today," Sarah said. "Right after you file. Tell him what we have. Ask him if he'll come." "It's a lot to ask," Clara said. "It's a lot that was done to him," Sarah replied. Clara nodded, put the letter in her bag, put on her hat, and walked out the door with the specific purpose of a woman who has been waiting a long time to do something useful with what she knows. They were on the road back to the ranch when Ethan said, "She's braver than most men I know." "She's angrier than most men you know," Sarah said. "She's been sitting on that filing cabinet for 2 years, watching Hale take people's land. That kind of anger, kept quiet for long enough, burns very clean." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Is that what yours does?" She thought about it, honestly. "Most days." He nodded, watching the road. Then he said, "Tell me about your father's store. In Ohio." The question surprised her. "Why?" "Because you keep things close," he said, "which I respect. But you know more about me than I do about you, and that doesn't seem right anymore." She looked at the road ahead. The morning light was full and hot, and the grass on either side was the color of old honey. "Henderson's Dry Goods," she said. "Columbus, Ohio. My father opened it in 1851. I started keeping the books when I was 12 because his handwriting was terrible and his arithmetic was worse." A pause. "He was a good man, very kind, not particularly practical." "Sounds familiar," Ethan said. "Thomas was the same way." She kept her voice even. "Kind, impractical, completely unequipped for illness. He fell sick in March, and by April—" She stopped, let it settle. "He fought hard, but he wasn't built for fighting." "And the baby?" "James." She said the name carefully, the way you carry something fragile. "He was born in the middle of April during a cold snap, perfect in every way that mattered. And then the fever came back, and I couldn't—" She stopped again. "I couldn't keep it from him." Ethan said nothing. The wagon moved along the road, and the heat pressed in, and he said nothing, which was exactly right, because there was nothing to say, and he seemed to understand that. After a while, she said, "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me." "I know why you're telling me," he said. "Why?" "Because you're asking me to stand beside you in a courthouse in 9 days, and you want me to know who I'm standing beside." She looked at him. "Yes." "I know who I'm standing beside," he said. It was simple, direct, no decoration. It landed differently than elaborate reassurance would have. She looked back at the road. "Your wife," she said. "You haven't talked about her." "No." "You don't have to." "Her name was Margaret," he said. "We married in 1969. She was from Georgia, which meant she was tougher than she looked, and more stubborn than was practical." Something moved through his voice, not grief exactly, but the specific tenderness of memory that has softened past its sharp edges. She loved this land, even in the drought years, even when it was hard. She said the land had character. He paused. She died in childbirth. The baby didn't survive either. Different from your situation, and the same in all the ways that matter. Lucy, Sarah said quietly. Lucy doesn't know what she lost, Ethan said. She lost her mother, she knows that. But what she lost before that... He stopped. Margaret would have given her a house full of noise, brothers and sisters. Margaret was built for a full house. His voice was steady, but only barely. I'm not particularly. I'm better one-on-one. You're doing fine, Sarah said. Lucy deserves better than fine. Lucy is remarkable, Sarah said. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because someone was paying attention. He didn't respond to that, but his shoulders dropped a fraction, the way a man's do when he releases something he's been carrying in a particular position for too long. They rode the rest of the way in a silence that was, for the first time, entirely comfortable. Jack Tanner was waiting at the ranch gate when they returned. He was a rangy man in his 60s, with a weathered face and the posture of someone who had worked outdoors his entire life and had come to an understanding with hard weather. He was holding his hat in his hands, and his expression was the expression of a man who had bad news and had been deciding how to deliver it for the last 20 minutes. "Ethan," he said, "glad you're back." Ethan climbed down from the wagon. "Jack, what's happened?" "Man came through about an hour after you left. Said he was from the county constable's office." Tanner looked briefly at Sarah, then back at Ethan. "He wasn't looking for you." A beat of silence. "He was looking for her," Ethan said. "Had a paper." Tanner turned his hat slowly in his hands. "Said there was an outstanding debt claim against a Sarah Whitmore, formerly of Columbus, Ohio. $47 in accumulated interest against a trade creditor." He looked at Sarah now, directly, with the apologetic steadiness of a decent man delivering bad news. "Said there was a warrant outstanding in the county of origin. He had paperwork." Sarah went completely still. $47. The remainder she had told Ethan about this very morning. The remainder she had left a letter for. The creditor she had promised to pay when she was settled. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice was very calm. "I left a letter. The creditor agreed in writing to defer." "The creditor sold the note," Tanner said quietly. "Apparently. To a holding company out of Fort Worth." He paused. 3 weeks ago. Fort Worth. 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks before she had arrived in Willow Ridge. Sarah looked at Ethan. He was already looking at her. "He found out about the debt," she said. "Bought the note before I ever arrived. So that if I became a problem, he'd have a warrant to remove you from the county," Ethan finished. His voice had gone very quiet. The particular quiet she had come to recognize as the sound of his fury finding its footing. "That's why he spoke to me on the boardwalk," Sarah said. "He wasn't warning me. He was measuring how much I already knew, deciding whether to use it immediately or hold it." She exhaled. "He held it until the mill didn't work." Tanner looked between them. "The constable said he'd be back tomorrow morning." "How much?" Ethan said. Tanner blinked. "Pardon?" "The debt. How much total with the interest?" $63. Ethan reached into his coat. He pulled out a worn leather billfold. He counted out bills on the wagon board without looking up, his burned hand moving with the deliberateness of a man performing an action he has decided on and does not intend to reconsider. "Ethan," Sarah said. $63, he said. He held out the bills to Tanner. "Can you get to the constable's office before nightfall?" "I can ride fast when I need to." "Then ride fast. Pay the note in full. Get a receipt with the constable's seal." Ethan's eyes moved to Sarah's face. "In her name, marked satisfied in full. "Ethan, that's your—" "It's money," he said, "and this is not a discussion." She stopped. She looked at him holding out the money, with his burned hand and his tired eyes, and the ash still faint in the lines of his face. And she felt something shift in her chest that was not grief, and not gratitude, and was not something she was prepared to name out loud. "I'll pay you back," she said. "I know you will," he said, as though that had never been in question. He looked at Tanner. Writhed. Tanner took the money and rode. Ethan turned and walked toward the house. Sarah stood at the wagon for a moment, one hand resting on the side of it, looking at the space where he had been. Then Lucy appeared at the porch door. She had her book under one arm and an expression that said she had overheard most of what had just happened and had opinions she was tactfully suppressing. "Are you coming in?" Lucy asked. "Yes," Sarah said. "Good." Lucy held the door. "Because I started the biscuits myself, and I think I put in too much salt." Sarah walked up the porch steps. "How much salt?" she asked. "A lot," Lucy admitted. "We can fix that," Sarah said, and followed her inside. Behind her, the day was moving toward afternoon, and 9 miles away in the back office of Hale Financial Trust, Victor Hale received a message that made him set down his glass. The counterpetition had been filed. He read the names on it. Ethan Callahan, Clara Ellis. A supporting reference to the Mooney and Garcia properties. A specific claim of forgery against a credit union account he had spent 4 years believing was buried past finding. He read it twice. Then he looked at the name of the lawyer referenced in the filing, Aldridge, out of Waco, and something happened to his expression that was not quite anger and not quite fear, and was entirely dangerous. He picked up his pen. He wrote 3 words on a piece of paper and folded it. He called for his man and handed it over. The 3 words were, "Stop the hearing." The letter from Aldridge arrived on the 3rd day. Clara Ellis brought it herself, riding out to the ranch at mid-morning with the envelope held against her chest like something she didn't trust to a saddlebag. Sarah met her at the gate and knew from the look on Clara's face before a single word was spoken that the news was not simple. It was not bad, but it was not simple. "Aldridge will come," Clara said, stepping down from her horse. "He'll represent Ethan in the hearing. But he wrote something else." She handed over the letter. "Read the 2nd paragraph." Sarah read it standing at the gate in the full heat of the morning. Aldridge had done his own investigation before responding. He had contacts in Fort Worth, a former colleague now working in property law, who had pulled the recent filings on Hale Financial Trust. What he found was bigger than 1 mill and 1 ranch in 1 Texas county. Hale had been systematically acquiring distressed rural properties across 4 counties for 7 years, all through the same mechanism: purchasing dormant debt from failed institutions, inflating the balances, and foreclosing on properties whose owners couldn't produce the original paperwork to contradict him. 17 properties. Maybe more. 17, Sarah said. "That we know of," Clara said. Sarah folded the letter. "This changes the shape of what we're doing." "It changes the audience," Clara said. "Aldridge thinks we shouldn't only be in front of a county judge. He thinks we should be in front of the district court. He thinks—" She paused. "He thinks there may be grounds for a federal fraud claim if the debt instruments crossed state lines." "Did they?" "The holding company that purchased your debt note is registered in Kansas." Sarah stood very still for a moment. "The same holding company Hale used to come after me." "Yes." "Then it's not a separate instrument. It's the same machine." Sarah looked at the letter again. "He uses the holding company to acquire debts from out of state. so there's no direct line back to him locally. And when someone becomes inconvenient, she thought about the constable's visit, the warrant, the $63 Ethan had paid without hesitation. He pulls the instrument and removes the problem. He's done it before, Clara said quietly. Aldridge found 2 other cases, both women. Both came to this county through correspondence arrangements, and both left within months. One under a debt warrant, one under circumstances that were never fully explained. Something cold moved through Sarah's chest. He targeted the correspondence arrangements specifically, she said. He knew that women coming in from out of state were isolated. No local connections, no standing, no one to vouch for them. Until now, Clara said. Ethan came around the side of the barn and stopped when he saw Clara's horse. He read the shift in Sarah's posture before he reached them and said, "What happened?" Sarah handed him the letter. He read it. His expression went through the same sequence hers had. Calculation, fury, the particular stillness that follows when a man realizes the thing he's been fighting is bigger than he understood, and decides that changes nothing about whether he'll fight it. Aldridge needs to see everything we have, he said. Every document, the ledgers, the county record, the letter from Forsyth, the Prescott testimony. Robert Prescott telegraphed this morning, Clara said. He'll come. He's bringing his wife. Ethan looked at her. He's coming back. He said, and I am quoting him directly, Clara straightened slightly. He said he left his land and he's been ashamed of it every day since. He said if there's a chance to put it right, he'll take the chance. Something moved through Ethan's face that was not quite tears and not quite relief, and was composed entirely of both. When does Aldridge arrive? He asked. Day after tomorrow, Clara said. The hearing is in 6 days. Then we have work to do, Ethan said. He looked at Sarah. All of it. Every piece. We lay it out tonight, and we go through it until there are no gaps. There's one gap, Sarah said. He waited. The original receipt. 114. We have everything around it. The ledger entry, the account summary, the Forsyth letter, the zero balance in the county record. But the receipt itself is still missing. She paused. And Hale knows it's missing because he took it. Which means in that courtroom, the first thing his lawyer does is point to the absence and say everything else is circumstantial. Silence. Clara said, Gerald Forsyth. They both looked at her. The credit union manager, Clara said. He wrote the letter confirming the zero balance. He's the one whose signature Prescott says was forged on the false debt instrument. She looked between them. He's still alive. He retired to San Marcos after the union closed. I've kept track of him because I keep track of everyone. A beat. He is 71 years old, and he has never testified about anything in his life. And he is, by all accounts, very tired of being quiet about what he knows. Sarah looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Sarah. Can you reach him in 6 days? Sarah asked. I can telegraph him in 6 minutes, Clara said. The next 5 days moved the way time moves when something enormous is approaching. Both too fast, and with an excruciating deliberateness that made every hour feel like a decision. Aldridge arrived on schedule, a compact, precise man in his late 40s, with sharp eyes and a briefcase that he treated with the reverence of someone who understood that paper was the most powerful weapon in any room. He sat at Ethan's kitchen table for 4 hours on the first evening, and went through every document with the focused intensity of a man who has spent 30 years learning how lies are constructed and exactly where they fall apart. At the end of 4 hours, he set down his pen and said, This is good. This is very good. But I need Forsyth. He's coming, Clara said. He telegraphed back within the hour. He'll be here by Friday. Aldridge looked at her, You organized all of this.
Sarah organized most of it, Clara said. I provided the filing cabinet.
Aldridge looked at Sarah.
Mrs. Whitmore, have you ever considered law?
I considered it briefly, Sarah said. Then I remembered that women aren't permitted to practice it.
A significant flaw in the system, Aldridge said, without any indication he was being anything other than sincere. He picked up his pen again. Let's talk about how you'll present in court.
Me, Sarah said. You found the documents. You identified the pattern. You made the connections no one else had made.
He looked at her steadily. In a courtroom, the person who tells the story clearly and without visible fear is more valuable than any piece of paper. The papers prove the case. The person makes the jury believe it. He paused. Can you stand up in front of a room full of people who are afraid of Victor Hale and tell the truth without flinching? Sarah thought about her baby boy, 6 weeks old and 7 pounds even. She thought about Thomas, too kind for the world he'd been given.
She thought about Lucy asking, "Did it get better?"
with those careful, ancient eyes.
"Yes,"
she said. Victor Hale made his move on Thursday. It came not through the sheriff this time, not through the constable, not through any official channel. It came through a man named Dillard, who showed up at the ranch gate at dusk with a plain envelope and the practiced neutrality of someone paid to deliver and not to know what he was delivering. The envelope was addressed to Sarah. Inside was a single page. No signature, no letterhead. The hearing will be postponed indefinitely. You will not be believed. Leave before it becomes worse for everyone. Sarah read it twice. Then she walked to the fireplace and held it in the flame until it was ash. Ethan watched her from the doorway. What was it? A suggestion, she said, that I found unpersuasive. He crossed the room and stood beside her at the fireplace, close enough that she could hear him breathing. He's scared, Ethan said. He should be, Sarah said. Sarah. His voice was quiet. She turned to look at him. Whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever Aldridge does or doesn't manage, I want you to know that what you've done here these past 2 weeks is... He stopped. Started again. I didn't hire you to fight my battles.
You hired me to be useful, she said. I'm being useful.
You've been more than useful. He said it plainly, without ceremony, which was the only way he knew how to say true things. You've been... He looked for the word and didn't find the right one, and settled for honest instead. Necessary. In a way I wasn't expecting. She looked at him in the firelight, with the ash of Victor Hale's threat settling in the grate between them. Ethan, she said carefully, don't say things you're only feeling because we're in the middle of something frightening. I've been feeling this since the second morning, he said. When I came back from the east pasture and you were already at the table with my father's ledgers and a cold cup of coffee, and that look on your face like you'd found something that made you angry on my behalf. He held her gaze. That was not a frightening morning. That was a regular morning. And I noticed. She was quiet. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I know it's too soon. I know you came here for a wage and a quiet household, and instead you got a burning mill and a warrant and a man who apparently can't make biscuits. A pause. I just didn't want to go into that courtroom tomorrow without having said it. She looked at him for a long moment, at the gray at his temples and the scar along his jaw and the burned hand that had gone back to work the day after she wrapped it, at the man who had paid $63 without discussion and meant it when he said it wasn't a negotiation. Ask me again, she said, when it's over, when there's nothing frightening happening and it's just a regular morning. She held his gaze. Ask me then. Something settled in his expression.
Not disappointment, something steadier than that. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. From upstairs, Lucy's voice floated down with a carrying power unique to 9-year-olds who are definitely not listening at the top of the stairs. "The biscuits are ready." Ethan looked at the ceiling. Sarah pressed her lips together. "She's been up there the whole time," Ethan said. "Obviously," Sarah said. They went upstairs for supper.
The courthouse in Willow Ridge was a single room with 12 wooden chairs and a judge's bench that had been built slightly too tall, which meant Judge Harlan, a lean, gray man from Fort Worth, who arrived Friday morning with the energy of someone who had seen every variety of human dishonesty and maintained his patience through sheer professional discipline, had to step up onto a riser to reach it, and did so without comment. The room was full. Sarah had not expected that. She had expected fear to keep people home, and fear had tried, but something else had gotten there first. The news of Robert Prescott's return, traveling mouth to ear through Willow Ridge overnight, like water finding its level, and by the time the hearing was called to order, there were people standing along the back wall and sitting on the windowsills. Ranchers and storekeepers and their wives, people with their own hail-shaped fears and their own carefully kept silences, all of them waiting to see which way the room would turn. Victor Hale sat at the right table with 2 lawyers and a composed expression that cost him something to maintain. Sarah could see it costing him. He looked at her once when she walked in, and she held his gaze for 3 full seconds before she looked away, which was not indifference. It was a message, and he received it. Aldridge was methodical and precise, the way a surgeon is precise, not because he was cold, but because he understood that the wrong cut in the wrong place ends things badly. He established the original loan. He established the repayment record from the elder Callahan's ledger. He submitted the county summary document with account 1871-114, marked 0 balance. He submitted the Forsyth letter. He submitted the Forsyth testimony, because Gerald Forsyth, 71 years old, tired of being quiet, having traveled 2 days from San Marcos, was sitting in that room, and stood up when called, and spoke in a voice that shook slightly with age, but not with uncertainty. "I managed that account," Forsyth said. "I closed it myself in March of 1873. The balance was 0. I signed the receipt. I know my own signature." He looked at Hale's table. "And the signature on that debt instrument is not mine." Hale's lawyer objected. Harlan overruled. Forsyth sat down. Then Aldridge called Sarah. She walked to the front of the room and stood rather than sat, because Aldridge had told her that standing made juries pay closer attention, and she looked at the people in those 12 chairs, ranchers, shopkeepers, a woman in the second row who was gripping her husband's arm with both hands. And she told the story. Not the legal argument. Aldridge had done that. She told the human story. The missing receipt. The pattern across 17 properties. The holding company in Kansas. The warrant manufactured from a $47 debt to silence her before she could speak. She spoke plainly and without performance, the way her father had taught her to present accounts. Every number in its right place, every line traceable, nothing hidden and nothing exaggerated. She said, "Victor Hale did not come after this ranch because of a debt. He came after it because of water. The Callahan property controls the water access for the Eastern Valley. 17 families depend on that access. And one man decided that his profit was worth more than 17 families' land." The room was completely silent. She looked at Hale directly. He met her eyes. His expression was perfectly composed, and behind it, something was very carefully not moving. "He has spent 7 years making people feel alone," Sarah said, "making each family believe their situation was unique and their fight was private,
and that no one else would stand with them. She looked back at the room. We are standing here today to say that is a lie, that it has always been a lie, and that the proof is in every document this court has received this morning. She sat down. Ethan, beside her, did not say anything, but his good hand moved under the table and found hers, briefly, and pressed once, and released. She kept her face forward. Hale's lawyers argued for 2 hours. They challenged the county document's chain of custody. They questioned Forsyth's memory. They produced a counter-affidavit from a notary in Fort Worth, who claimed the debt instrument was legitimate. Aldridge produced the Kansas Holding Company's registration documents, obtained by his Fort Worth colleague, showing the company had been incorporated 6 weeks before Sarah arrived in Willow Ridge. The notary from Fort Worth went very pale. Robert Prescott stood up without being called and said in a voice that carried to every corner of the room, "He did the same thing to me. Same papers, same timeline. I know because I left, and I've regretted it every single day. I'm not leaving again." Hale's lead lawyer leaned over and said something quietly into Hale's ear. Hale did not respond. He was looking at the room, at the faces of the people in it. People who owed him money. People who had been quiet for years. People who were no longer looking at the floor. A man in the third row, who had been one of Hale's most reliable debtors, met his eyes and did not look away. Victor Hale had spent 7 years making people feel alone. And in this room, on this morning, he was the one who was alone. Judge Harlan recessed for 40 minutes. He came back and delivered his findings in the flat, methodical tone of a man who reached his conclusions before he left the room and is now simply reading them aloud. The debt claim against Ethan Callahan was dismissed. The forged instrument was referred to the district attorney for criminal investigation. The accelerated hearing petition was denied. The counter-petition for fraud was accepted as a valid claim. The water rights deed, entered into evidence by Aldridge with the court's protection, was confirmed as legitimate property of the Callahan estate. A federal inquiry into the Kansas Holding Company was recommended. Victor Hale was asked to surrender his travel documents to the court, pending the criminal referral. He sat at that table and did not move for a long moment. Then he stood, with the contained precision of a man who refuses to let anyone see him break, buttoned his coat, and walked out of the room. 3 of the 4 lawyers followed him. The 4th stayed behind to speak with the court clerk about the surrender documents. In the room, for one held second, there was silence. Then the woman in the second row let go of her husband's arm and started to cry. Not quietly, but the full, open way that comes when something that has been held very tightly for a very long time is finally released. Her husband put his arms around her and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who is refusing to do the same thing. Someone in the back started to clap. It spread. Sarah sat in the noise of it and did not quite understand, for a moment, what had happened. Not because it was unclear, but because she had been so completely focused on the doing of it that the completion of it had arrived before she was ready to receive it. She had been so long in the middle of something terrible that the outside of it felt unfamiliar. Ethan was saying something to Aldridge beside her. Clara Ellis was across the room talking to Robert Prescott and his wife, with the contained, brisk warmth of a woman who is not going to cry in public and has firmly decided this. Lucy, who had been seated in the very back of the room with Jack Tanner's wife, supposedly too young to attend but clearly present, came pushing through the crowd and threw her arms around her father's waist and pressed her face into his side, and he held her with both arms and closed his eyes. Sarah watched this and felt the space in her chest that had been empty for months, the space shaped exactly like loss, fill with something that was not the same as what had been there before and was not trying to be. Something new, something that fit the shape of here and now and this.
3 weeks later, on an ordinary morning when the heat had begun to soften towards September, and the grass had taken on the first faint suggestion of change, Sarah was at the kitchen table with the household accounts spread before her when Ethan came in from the east pasture. He was dusty from the ride, and his boots needed cleaning, and he had a smear of something on his left sleeve that she chose not to identify. He poured himself coffee and stood at the counter and looked at her with the particular steady quality of a man who has been thinking about something for a while and has decided this is the moment. "Regular morning," he said. She looked up from the accounts. "Nothing frightening," he said. "No warrants, no fire, no banker with bad intentions." He set down his cup. "Just Tuesday." She held his gaze. "Ask me then," you said. He picked up his cup again, turned it in his hands, set it back down. The slight awkwardness of a man who is more comfortable with action than with the words before it. "So I'm asking, not for anything immediate, not for anything you're not ready for." He looked at her directly. "Just whether this is a place you want to stay." Sarah looked at the household accounts in front of her. She looked at the cracked blue pitcher on the windowsill, which she had repaired properly and filled with a stem of dried grass and a late summer wildflower that Lucy had brought in, without explanation, 3 days ago. She looked at the mark on the doorframe, where Lucy had measured her own height last week, and declared herself taller than she'd been in April, which Ethan had confirmed with great solemnity, and which Sarah had written in pencil in a spot that would not be painted over. She thought about Thomas and the way he had snored, and the cradle he had built that she had left in Ohio because she couldn't bear to bring it, and couldn't bear to leave it, and had left it anyway. She thought about James, 7 pounds even, and how the size of a person bore no relationship to the size of the space they left. She thought about grief, which does not end, but changes, which gets different, which can, eventually, make room. "Yes," she said, "just that." Ethan nodded once, the way he received all important information, without theater, with complete attention. Then he picked up his coffee and sat down across from her and looked at the accounts. "The south fence needs materials," he said. "I thought you should know before you finalized the supply list." "I already have it on the list," Sarah said. He looked up. She looked back. Outside, the windmill turned in the morning wind, steady and unhurried, the way things move when they are built right and maintained with care and given time enough to find their rhythm. Lucy's voice came from upstairs, bright and entirely too loud for the hour, announcing that she had found the loose floorboard was also loose in the hallway, and she considered this a structural matter requiring immediate adult attention. Ethan stood up. Sarah put down her pencil and followed him. The house around them was full of ordinary noise, and the land outside was beginning to breathe again. And Sarah Whitmore, who had arrived in Willow Ridge with a suitcase that weighed less than her grief and a letter she had read 100 times, had finally, in the truest and most complete sense of the word, arrived.